Just to take you through the agenda, we have technology. So we have quite a broad range of speakers and panelists in the session, and we expect this to be very exciting. Our first session will be by Christine Grivet of AgThrive, just to set the pace on what we'll be discussing today in terms of finance. Jacopo Parigiani, I hope I said that correctly. This is more on precision farming, determining soil health, and how that links to climate financing. And then we have Dr. Boniface Akuku from FAO on data and digital tools, and there are quite a wide range of tools that FAO has in terms of de-risking, policy, and he's going to showcase just how some of them have been able to use that in the space with both public and private institutions. And lastly, we'll have Marguerite from Aecon Rabobank. There's the whole discussion about carbon markets, so we'll demystify that for you today and show you that at least there are models that are already working that we can learn from within the region, and that's on agroforestry, carbon removal units. And then after that, we will have the panel. Just to start us off, I had shared a question, and I think they'll just change my screen, on what is climate smart agriculture. And thank you, quite a number of you just gave us your quick answers, because we have quite a diverse set of people in the room. And just to read out a few of the answers is agriculture that improves productivity, agriculture that uses current climatic data for decision making on what crops to grow in certain areas based on the observed weather conditions. And I like this one, farming in a smart way for the future. Precise, to the point, and I think it addresses everything. For me, what climate smart agriculture is, it's an approach to farming that aims to address challenges of climatic change while also promoting sustainable agricultural practices. And the three main pillars that we'll be looking at are resilience, adaptation, and mitigation. So as we go through the presentations today and the discussions, one of the key questions that we need to look at is, how do we finance digital climate smart agriculture innovations, particularly at scale? Because we all know that there is financing for agriculture and there is financing for climate smart agriculture. But what models have been used and what models are working that we can all tap into to be able to move to move the innovative solutions that we have. And one of the things I wanted to just discuss is about what innovation means for you. Sometimes we think innovation it has to be something new, it has to be digital, and for me that's not the case. Innovation can be, I'm doing the same thing but in a new way. So, and one of the things about Climate Smart is Climate Smart can be doing regenerative agriculture, but it can be in a traditional way. The way we do crop cover, we used to do that back in the day, but how do we do it better right now? So it doesn't have to be a new technology, it's just a new way of doing things, or an inventive way of doing things. And with that, I think I'll give now to Christine Grivet to continue. Thank you.
I'm happy to be here and excited to open this session on digital climate smart agriculture. So first, let's start with the basics. What is digital climate smart agriculture, or DCSA, as we like to call it? In many ways, I think of it as a perfect marriage, if such a thing is actually possible, bringing together the urgency to address climate change now with the ability of digital solutions to achieve scale quickly and rapidly adjust. Digital is still having its moment, as we are well aware, and we need to leverage it to address climate impacts. DCSA encompasses input, services, and information that leverage digital tools to support farmers in adapting to climate change. The goal of designing, trialing, and scaling DCSA to support smallholder farmers is to achieve enhanced resilience and increase sustainable productivity and reduced emissions when possible. We don't lead with reducing emissions because the burden of climate change should not rest on the backs of smallholder farmers. DCSA solutions seek to achieve emissions reductions when possible as a co-benefit to other impacts. Why digital specifically? Digital is not the only solution, of course. It's not the silver bullet to addressing climate change, but it can be an important mechanism to help farmers adapt to climate change. Digital reaches more people faster, at a lower cost, and at the scale needed to help address the climate emergency. Note that farmer training and information has been identified as the single largest barrier to climate-smart agriculture adoption globally. Yesterday, we heard from several companies already providing digital advisory that are starting to scale, which shows the potential for DCSA-specific advisory. In addition, something that's very important is that digital lends itself to customization. There is no one CSA solution for all circumstances. Climate change impacts and solutions are variable by cropping system and even community. Customized and localized information, inputs, and services are a key feature of DCSA. So opportunities for DCSA can be found throughout the agriculture and livestock value chains. Climate services, such as weather forecasts, are an important and probably the most well-known DCSA, but digital tools can also be leveraged, for example, for training on CSA practices, input ordering and distribution, targeting climate-adapted varietals, financial services, such as crop and livestock insurance, precision agriculture, such as farm-specific fertilizer and other advisory, and market access for climate-smart crops. Another important feature of digital is that it provides a platform for multiple providers to reach smallholder farmers with DCSA products and services, which is an approach shown to be favored by farmers. So how many smallholder farmers actually need and can use DCSA? What is the total addressable market that DCSA providers can build and market products for? Is it worth the investment? The market is potentially massive. An analysis we at AgThrive did with the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT on behalf of AgriFen showed a current addressable market of 34 million smallholder farmers in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Nigeria alone. We looked at who is at risk of climate hazards, think drought, floods, extreme temperatures, combined with who can access digital solutions. As connectivity increases, especially in countries such as Ethiopia, where it is still low, more and more farmers at risk of climate hazards will be connected and can access and benefit from DCSA. So let's dig a little deeper into the total addressable market for DCSA in Kenya. In Kenya, there are 16 million individuals in smallholder farming households who are facing climate hazards. 41% of these individuals have access to a mobile connection. Thus, with our simple calculation, 6.6 million smallholder farmers in Kenya need and have the channel to utilize DCSA. Kenya has strong mobile coverage compared to other sub-Saharan African countries, but mobile connectivity will still limit the market for DCSA a bit. The figure does not represent expected adoption or active use, just potential that we can work towards. So let's continue for a minute with our Kenya example. Over 15 million smallholder farmers are at risk of facing 2 or more climate hazards, such as drought and unpredictable rainfall. For those of us living here who have experienced repeated drought and floods, plus huge variability and uncertainty in when the rains are starting, their intensity and duration, these findings are of no surprise. We have already witnessed prolonged drought periods, among the worst in decades. We are grateful to be seeing more normal rains this short rainy season in some parts of the country, but not all, and flooding is causing destruction as we speak. So what does this look like for farmers? This makes it difficult for farmers to plan and execute successful growing seasons. This could look like a farmer in the highland perennial system growing a mix of crops, including bananas, and raising dairy cattle with good access to markets and services. Production has been low the last couple of years due to low rainfall. She doesn't know anymore when the rains will start, or when to plant, or whether the rains will be enough to produce a good crop. Sometimes it is good and sometimes not, but she knows it is worse in other parts of the country and that her prices have been high due to low production elsewhere. She gets some weather information from the radio, but doesn't find it to be particularly accurate. Right now, it is hard to feed the dairy cows enough to get a good supply of milk. She heard from a neighbor that producing silage could be a good option for her, but she doesn't know anything about silage production. The farmer has an old smartphone and good network connectivity. What DCSA services do you think could meet this farmer's needs? And this could also look like a pastoralist managing a herd of cattle and goats in the Azores. Drought is persistent. The herd has not been able to recover good health in the brief respite during some times of rain and green grass. A huge number of animals have died. Finding enough food and water for the remaining animals is tough. It is hard to find a good price when selling due to skinny animals and depressed market prices. But the word from the markets is that there are buyers from the Middle East who want goats, and he would like to capture this market. This pastoralist has a cheap smartphone and goes in and out of network coverage. What DCSA services could meet this pastoralist needs? One of the points I want to emphasize here is that there is a great diversity of production systems, climate impacts, and smallholder farmer needs, even within countries. CSA is not one size fits all. Any DCSA solution needs to account for context and local priorities. CSA is also crop specific, so just very briefly, let's look at beans in Kenya. Beans are a hugely important crop for Kenya with one of the highest areas of production. It is a CSA country priority, meaning that has been identified at the national level as being a priority value chain for a climate smart approach. It has high climate risk due to shifts in suitability of land for bean production. It is important for national nutrition, and it is an important crop for women farmers. Climate variability, often leading to drought, is the biggest climate hazard for beans, and it can lead to crop losses in the range of almost 300 million. Models show that more than half of the area where beans are currently produced will be less suitable for production with climate change. This doesn't mean beans can't be grown in those areas, but it will be increasingly challenging and will require better information and possibly different varietals and inputs. This is worth addressing. Bean producers in Kenya alone are a huge potential market for DCSA at 675,000 smallholder farmer households, and they're facing increasingly challenging production conditions. You can begin to think about and problem solve on what DCSA solutions Kenyan bean farmers might need, keeping in mind that they don't only produce beans, but are producing in a mixed crop livestock system. What existing digital solutions can be leveraged for bean farmers? Can the researchers, development partners, and start ag tech companies in this room get together and address these challenges? Yes, of course, that can be done, and the time is now to make that happen. So I've defined DCSA and shown you the massive and potential need for DCSA information, training, inputs, and services. But what type of finance do we need to unlock for DCSA? So to be clear, climate finance is not only carbon credits, which are in the nascent stage of being leveraged for smallholder farmers and have a long ways to go before they can reach scale. We'll hear more about carbon credits later from our colleague at Rabobank. But climate finance includes other types of finance as well. It includes any type of finance that has the goal of climate mitigation and/or adaptation, and can come through multiple financing mechanisms and from different finance providers listed here on this slide. So it is clear that we need to leverage climate finance from diverse sources to support the many DCSA startups and scaling companies attempting to reach smallholder farmers, but these facts speak for themselves. Less than 50% of climate finance targets smallholder farmers. Ag tech gets only 14% of climate tech funding. Energy is the preference in funding. Early R&D, very important to design technical, customized CSA solutions, is very underfunded. Companies are forced to bootstrap and self-finance development. This means some companies never get off the ground, and that some take longer to get to market than they would if better financed. Take the example of Ignitia, a firm providing tailored digital weather advisory and also an AgriFin partner. They spent 6 years testing their product before bringing it to market. Given the urgency of the climate situation, we don't have time for this. But there is a bright side. Many more investors are putting climate in their impact goals and at the top of their priority list. Yes, most investments are in low-hanging fruit, such as solar irrigation, but we are likely to see more investments in innovative models as investors increasingly feel the need and pressure to work towards climate adaptation and mitigation goals. AgThrive looked at more than 100 investors financing agriculture in East Africa and found that more than 50% are seeking climate impacts in their investments. Development finance institutions were the most likely to have climate-related investment goals, followed by impact investors. Donors remain very focused on smallholder farmers, with less of a specific climate focus, but this is shifting rapidly. Commercial banks are not listed here on this slide, but as we heard during the leader panel yesterday, they can be key actors in supporting farmers to adopt CSA. The CEO of Equity talked about climate change frequently and the need to address those impacts. What we are consistently hearing from investors is that they know that climate needs to be a priority. They would like to make it a priority with their investments, but they don't always know how to identify solutions that can achieve resilience, adaptation, and mitigation, nor do they know how to target or measure climate impacts. This uncertainty ends up limiting their investment even when they consider it to be a priority. So what can we do to grow the pie for DCSA solutions that can reach the millions of smallholder farmers that are facing terrible climate risks but have a mobile phone and connectivity? So we can start with getting data sharing working. So data sharing is critical to drive DCSA solutions given the data intensity and customized tailored solutions that are required. Putting in place the frameworks, partnerships, and incentives necessary to get data sharing working is fundamental to driving success in the DCSA space. So data sharing works when farmers, businesses, and governments give a little but get a lot back. So that, that's about putting the right incentive structures in place. I was speaking to a colleague from SIAT, Ani Ghosh, this morning, and he's been at a parallel fertilizer meeting. And he said that a fertilizer company in the room said that they would be willing to share data from 100 trials and soil testing if they could get back better fertilizer recommendations for farms. So it's a tit for tat. We need to get this working. This is also important from the perspective of measuring climate-related outcomes. So this is needed to unlock climate finance even beyond carbon credits. Investors need the data as well to feel comfortable with their climate-related investments. So we also need to come together to de-risk. I mean, this is the case in many of agriculture-related types of investments, but also true in the climate space. Donors can come together with investors to de-risk investments in DCSA. They can develop a DCSA fund. Donors can provide guarantees as appropriate, et cetera. The bottom line is to find ways to buy down the risk of investors providing more finance in the DCSA space at early stage and also growth. And finally, this relates back to the example I provided on Ignitia. Acceleration is important. So a pot of money is needed to support early stage businesses designing DCSA solutions for smallholder farmers. Otherwise, in the face of immediate climate hazards, it will take too long and highly impactful solutions may never come to market. Demand is there, investors are interested. It is time to seize this moment and develop and scale DCSA solutions that can deliver resilience and sustainable productivity results for smallholder farmers across the African continent and the world. With that, I will conclude, and I'll say now on to the rest of the session, during which we'll learn more about some climate finance options and hear some inspiring examples of DCSA in action.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jacopo Parigiani. I work for a company called Crop Nutrition Laboratories. We're based in Nairobi, and we are an agricultural laboratory. And on the back of that, we do a lot of services. One of these is soil mapping, and I'm going to present some of the findings of a project we did last year on soil mapping and input recommendations for 4 counties in Kenya. We did it for Mexico and for Apollo Agriculture. So what was our approach? Basically, we collected a number of georeference samples across Bungoma, Trans Nzoia, Uasin Gishu, and Elgeyo Marakwet in Kenya, analyzed those samples and generated recommendations for fertilizers and lime and soil corrections in order to boost yield. So you can see a map of the different counties with the arable area. So the first thing we did is we identified the sampling sites through identification and generation of fertility zones through using covariate analysis, so using different data sets to identify, let's say, similar soil types, similar elevations, and similar climate areas, and delineate zones out of the counties. We navigated to the different sites, collected samples, analyzed the samples, and then basically fine-tuned the zones to generate the fertility recommendations. Right. So, excuse me. So the different covariates that we used were county, the area of interest, the county boundaries, land use data, land cover data, digital elevation model. So the elevation of the different sites and long-term temperatures and precipitations, and NDVI, normalized difference vegetation index, which shows how the biomass, let's say, progresses in different areas. So to get an idea of what sort of potential yields or potential yield we would get at the different locations. Based on the covariate analysis, we then determined sampling sites based on the locations of where the Apollo farmers were, and identified an optimal amount of zones, which gave us a good amount of diversity in the zones in terms of the parameters that we use in the covariates. So 5 teams collected samples between November and December last year. So it's quite a recent project. And within each farm, we collected one sample, collecting subsamples using W sampling, which basically is we walk up and down in a zigzag pattern across a field and generate a sample, which was sent back to the laboratory for analysis. All the samples were analyzed for the different parameters. We used mid-infrared spectrometry to analyze all of the samples and calibrated with 20% of the samples using wet chemistry, analyzing data such as pH, potassium, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, organic matter, exchangeable acidity and acid saturation, all of these parameters that help us to determine what corrections and what fertility recommendations to be given for maize in this case. So what are the results? So initially we defined the 4 zones, and based on the analysis we reran the geostatistics and identified refined 4 zones, and you can see them color-coded in red, yellow, blue, and green. And mostly these zones are differentiated by elevation, by temperature. And you can see zone 1 has got a lower elevation than zone 3, and so on. So the different elevations and the different temperatures determine different yield potentials. And so different characteristics, let's say, of different requirements as well for fertilizer recommendations. The soil data in the different zones are summarized here. You can see that there's we use color coding. The green is optimal, red is very low, blue is high, and most of the zones have got, they're quite variable, and pH is low in general for all of them. Phosphorus is very low in all locations, so that would require a phosphorus fertilization, and potassium is low in only one zone, and then other parameters, organic matter is variable, ranging from 2.5 to 4.6%. But yeah, there's quite a lot of variation across the different zones. And based on this data now, on the zoning, we can generate the fertility recommendations. The average yield data in Kenya is 1 ton per hectare of maize, which is quite low. And based on the elevation, the temperature, we can identify different yield targets, and optimal yield targets for the different zones range between 4 to 5.5 tons per hectare with good agronomical practices and with good recommendations and good products and the right products, then we can achieve those targets. In terms of soil correction, so when we run soil analysis, we give 2 different types of recommendations. One is for soil correction, so to balance out the pH, the calcium, the magnesium, and all the balances in the soil. And the other recommendations are for achieving our yields, so for feeding the crops. And yeah, so we found out that through zoning, due to the intra-farm variability of soils, the pH varies a lot, and the calcium to and the ratios of calcium to magnesium vary quite a lot across within each zone, because from farm to farm, because of the different management, I don't know what's going on with the different individual management of the farmers. So it's very difficult to provide to use the zonal approach to provide good liming recommendations. The fertilizer program was determined by the levels of, by targeting phosphorus levels and potassium levels, and different products were advised depending on whether potassium was deficient or not in the zone. And you can see that while zone 1, 3, and 4 required DAP as basal fertilizers because potassium is available in those soils, zone 2 having deficiencies of potassium would require level NPK, and in this case it was 12, 24, 12. And micronutrients to be targeted were boron and zinc in most cases. The top dressing fertilizers the rates are determined by levels of organic matter. So if there's high organic matter, then the top dressing requirements of nitrogen is lower, and in those areas where the organic matter is low, the inverse is true, so higher nitrogen top dressing levels are required, and you can see that at different yield targets, so we've got yield targets from 10 to 30 bags per acre, the rates change quite a lot depending on the different zones. So quick discussion. Well, our basal fertilizer was driven by the levels of P and the yield potential, and the type of fertilizer was determined by the amount of potassium in the soil. So the difference, the zoning proved quite very useful to determine the levels of potassium and phosphorus in the soils. So it was, and so it identified areas that need different products rather than DAP and rather than a blanket recommendations. Top dressing nitrogen was driven by levels of organic matter and yield potential. So again, organic matter, different farms and different zones have different levels of organic matter. Manure was required on 47% of the farms and not recommended. The median value in the different zones was not a good indicator of organic matter. So again, for manure application, we would have to do more individual soil sampling from farm to farm in order to determine the values of manure to apply. And the same is valid for pH. pH and lime recommendations are not well suited to zoning. So it would require site-specific sampling to determine lime recommendations. So so that's our case scenario. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you very much, sir, for your presentation. I'm Michael Linas. I'm a farmer. From what I've seen, your sampling was done in one region, around the Rift Valley region. Is this sampling representative of soil fertility and nutrient content across the country, or what do other people who are far removed from the area that you did your sampling, what can they do to also get such data to be informed on what they can do to improve their soil and production? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question. Well, in this case, this project was focusing on those particular counties. But yeah, I mean, ideally each farmer would get a soil sample and get recommendations on an individual soil sample. But what soil mapping can help to do is to provide what we call we can have soil maps of the different parameters across the country, for example, in order that, and one farmer can locate himself on that map, and based on the levels of the different nutrients can then determine a rate, a fertilizer recommendation. I don't know if that sort of answers the question.
Yes, it does. But from my experience, I come from Migori County. And to the best of my knowledge, in around Uriri sub-county, we do not really have a lot of interventions that are doing soil testing for farmers. We still farming the traditional old methods. We just trying to wing it. Any season that works, yes, we say thank you, Lord. A season that goes south, we say, okay, it was a bad season, we'll move on and try again next year. But then, with a lot of organizations trying to improve farming, and we're talking of smallholder farmers. These are people who do not have money to even do soil sampling. Myself, I have interacted with CropNut a lot, and I have a farm in Juja, Darugo. We do hydroponics, but we went ahead and tested the soil because we wanted to do some other herbs like basil and rosemary in the soil, as opposed to the other crops that we are doing under hydroponics. But the farmers back in my village do not have the kind of money that CropNuts charge to do soil sampling. And these are the people who are feeding us on a daily basis. I still go back home when I come from Nairobi. It's my mother who gives me food. I don't go there carrying any tin of maize or flour to be fed with. But these are the people that are left out completely in the interventions that are meant to increase food productivity. We're talking of SDG goal number 2, about food security, but we have ignored the very people that make such interventions be brought to the country. These things benefit mostly those people with money, the people who have large farms, the people who have an opportunity to come to such conferences, interact with these people. So what exactly can be done, even if it is contacting the government and working with other people, to do soil testing across the country for these smallholder farmers, even if they're pulled together? They don't even have farmer cooperatives. So this question does not just go to you, sir, but this goes to many other people in the room with the kind of money that can assist these people, with the kind of connections that can give the government an idea on how to go about this. What is happening? I'd really wish to know. What is happening? How can my grandmother get her soil tested to be advised on how to improve her agricultural production? Thank you.
Great question. So I think the affordability and access to soil testing has been a huge problem across Africa. Traditional soil testing, soil health advice has been costly. We've been working very hard to bring down the cost of soil testing using new technologies, machine learning technologies, like Jacopo described. Some of our partners are getting to as low as $4 per test now. This type of test here is under $10. So when you look at the cost of the actual fertilizer inputs related to that soil test cost, then you start to get to a ratio which actually is starting to work, also from a finance perspective. So I think one of the big outcomes for us from this workshop and this partnership with AgriFin is how we work towards getting soil testing financed within a bundle, because we're very good at financing inputs, seed and fertilizer, but unless those farmers are actually using that finance to buy the right fertilizer, then actually the risks of not getting a response in the field because they're using incorrect inputs actually takes them into a worse spiral of debt. So for us, this is really one key focus for us as a business is in the bundling and financing of soil testing within these loans. But we do hope to serve your grandmother soon.
Advising farmers the right fertilizer, the right quantity, and when to apply it. And what CropNet is doing is good, but the government is also planning through a World Bank funding to buy scanners for each ward. And they will be able to scan a sample, so it's not every farm, a sample of, so you can talk to World Bank CropNet. I know you're one of the 1 million farmer platform. So you can talk to them and see how that comes in. So that we'll be able to scan at least 10% of each soil in the ward, and we'll be able to run a sample, and we can be able to inform. And after that, so we plan to do yield estimation. We have always had people carrying things on their head because there's no maize, but we don't know how much we're producing, whether we're going to get enough or not. And also crop monitoring. We are piloting something now on crop monitoring. And also, we'll be able to look at financial access, supply chain optimization, and market access. I've had in this country where farmers are saying, I don't know where to sell. But I've also had buyers saying, I don't know where to buy. There's a disconnect between what the farmers produce and what other actors are doing. So we're looking at how do we bridge that gap between what the farmers have and who needs it. Okay, so the other one is the National Land Digital Management System. So this is basically to help the land ministry to digitize the land tenure system. And land is very emotive, but everything we plant goes to the soil. Every animal we keep graze something that comes from the soil, or feed from what comes from the soil. So land is very important. So, but we have this not properly organized. So we believe that by digitizing the land ecosystem in the country, we'll be able to have better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life. And I can see this room has a number of youths. And youth knows that when you talk about agriculture is punishment. Because in school, every time you did a mistake, you were told, you go and farm. And every time you didn't do well in class, you were told, you want to be a farmer. You want to be a farmer. And every time we had a debate, it was a teacher is better than a farmer. And that debate always won. A teacher is better than a farmer. So we grew up knowing farming is a bad thing. A teacher is better than a farmer. If you fail, you want to be a farmer. You know, if you do a mistake, you are taken to farm. So how then do we attract youth? So we've built a platform called Africa Youth and Agripreneur, where we are providing information to youth to know that agriculture is not just about tilling the land. You can be an aggregator, you can be a service provider, you can do capacity building, but you can also farm. I have 60 acres of farm myself in Kajiado. So you can farm. So I'm a farmer also. So it's possible to farm. So that's the platform. You can go to it. So you see there's a farmer there was saying, initially was not interested. But after using this platform and getting information and technical knowledge on how to do farming, now is farming. So the WAPO is basically looking at monitoring land and water productivity. Every crop requires a certain amount of water to produce optimally. If you give him too much, it will be stressed because of too much water. If you get less, it will also be stressed because of less water. So every crop requires a certain amount of water. And that's what we call crop water requirement ratio. Many people don't know how to calculate that. So using modeling, using remote sensing, we were able to calculate that, and this being piloted in Busia, and then you can know what to do to your farm. So what do you do when there's too much water in your farm? You can make drainage, you can apply other intervention to reduce the water content, or what do you do when there's less water in your farm? So that's what you can do. So this information can now help the farmer make decision. It needs to be on real time. So currently we are providing that every 10 days to be able to look at the water consumption and what to call the moisture demand. I don't want to go to scientific. There's always what to call the moisture, the demand from the atmosphere. What are the crop demand from the atmosphere, from the moisture? So that's being calculated. You can visit it and you can play around with it. That's the site. Yes, so the Agriculture Digital for Development and Digital Innovation Use Cases for Impact support innovative engagement in agriculture by youth, women, to increase productivity and market access and resilience. So what we're doing here is trying to see how do we engage different groups and how do we understand through an ideation process, how do we understand their pain points and how can digital tools be able to assist them. The reason for this is that technology can also be exclusive. So how do we bring inclusivity into technology debate? This is what we're doing here. Okay, so how is this all contributing to climate finance? So number one, once we know who the farmers are, what kind of environment they're operating in, what kind of the situations are there, the soil, the crops they grow, we can be able now to work in reducing greenhouse gas emission. But on top of that, we can say how can we get to low carbon initiative, how can we encourage energy efficiency, renewable energy, and this can lead to carbon credit financing. So my friend who is coming after this, you need to talk to me about this. You can see how to do this. Now, we also believe that when farmers adopt digital platform, it can help them reduce their vulnerability. So how can we de-risk them? How can we be able to come up with fair credit scoring? There are two people in the world that hardly get credit. These are pastors and farmers. Because the bank or the credit people ask farmers, how do I know you'll produce? And pastors are asked, today you have 1 million for congregation. Tomorrow they can run away, go to another church. How am I sure that you will pay the loan? So farmers and pastors are suffering. But farmers are suffering the most. But with this kind of data we are collecting, the transaction data we are collecting, the baseline data we have collected, we'll now be able to do proper fair credit scoring that can now allow commercial banks and other investors to give farmers credit. And this is being arranged through a model, we call it a agripreneur model. There will be circles and there will be cooperatives to make sure this happens. And lastly, all this innovation help us in mitigating effect of climate change. If you can know water requirement ratio, you can know your soil, you can know what fertilizer to apply. If you also understand the environment, the ecosystem the farmers are working, therefore we can be able to advise them. So CSA simply mean how can we make farmers adapt and make them resilient and reduce green carbon emission. It is adaptation plus resilient minus greenhouse carbon emission. Thank you.
Just a question around the business model for this services and the revenue generating model beyond the World Bank.
Okay. Yeah, the business model is that this is why we're calling agripreneur model. So the government or the Ministry of Agriculture will engage these are private agripreneurs, private sector actors. They will be supported for about 1 year. After that, they should become self-sustaining. They should be able to charge these services so that the grandmother of my friend here can afford. Yeah, so that's the model. So it's not going to be public good for forever, but there must be initial investment from the government as a public good, so that the structures are created and the data structures are created, the digital ecosystem is established, so that now the agripreneurs who are not well endowed with resources, who can work at the village level, are able to offer these services to farmers at affordable cost, but because at least the government was able to create some infrastructures for them so that they don't have to invest in heavy. We spent billions just to digitize farmers, 6.4 going to 7 million now, which no private sector is going to invest in. So the government has to invest in some of this infrastructure. But the government cannot keep investing, so it has to turn to agripreneur model.
Thank you.
The other hand up. Okay.
Okay, I've loved your presentation on all the data that you're providing to, that is accessible, that farmers can use. And my question is there an option, or is there a possibility where private sector can be able to plug into your systems so that they can be able to build on the platforms to reach directly to the farmers whom they are working with? Thank you.
Yes, there's a possibility, and my philosophy is that no one can do it alone, can make it alone. The government cannot make it alone. The private sector cannot make it alone. Because there's certain infrastructure that only the government can invest in. Private sector will not be investing in it. And yet, the government also lacks the resources to do the last mile and also sustainability. So the problem that we've been having is that people have been asking for the data. And we have issues like data privacy, data governance. So what I've always advised, and let me advise this forum also. Some of you, when you are coming here, there's a lady who kept on telling you, turn left, turn right, after 1 kilometer, turn this. That lady has never been to Kenya, but she's able to direct you and you are a Kenyan. What that lady is using, just leveraging on Google data, using Google API, using Google services to direct to this place. So what I'm encouraging is that, can we take a service-oriented model where you build your services on top of this data, as opposed to asking to be given this data? I mean, if those who came with Uber, you went to the app, you simply say Safari Park, and the app was able to pick the GPS coordinate where you are and the GPS coordinate of Safari Park. Using this distance matrix analysis, was able to calculate the distance between Safari Park and where you are. Using satellite data, was able to see how the traffic is, was able to calculate the price, was able to see the nearest driver and would tell you the time you're going to reach here and the amount you're going to pay. None of your data was exchanged. So only a service was being used through an API. And all private sector that want leverage on this data, please come, but come knowing, don't ask us to give you the data. Come and build your service on top of this data and serve the farmers.
Thank you. Maybe a related question to, I think, and maybe I'm trying to understand the business model a little bit clearer. So no issues building on the data, right? But today, or I guess in the future, if it's an agripreneur model, is the expectation that, let's say, 5 years from now, the local agripreneurs will be collecting that data, managing it, and validating it, so that if we are building services, right, on top of that, I think from a 5-10 year sustainability as a business, we want to make sure that, we can rely on that data long term. So it would be helpful to understand how then the agripreneur model validation, maintenance of that data looks like in the long term, so that we can invest, as a private sector in building on top of that.
Thank you. Yes, so the model is almost what you have just said. So each agripreneur will be assigned a certain number of farmers that he or she can be able to manage. So he'll be responsible for that, collecting or updating the farmer data and the farm data. Today I have 1 acre, tomorrow I have 2 acres that need to be updated. So that's one area, which how we're going to do it. So after 1 year, they will now be starting to charge for those services. But they're going to also give the farmers other services to walk through the farmer so the farmer is able to produce and make profit. Because farmers will not pay for services if they're not making profit. So until they start making profit, they will see value and the impact of this data that they can now pay for these services. Number 2, there are structures being set up such as cooperatives and circles at ward level. Because that's another way where you can aggregate this data. Because if you ask a farmer, how much milk did you produce today? The farmer will tell you 10 liters, yet he produced 1 liter. Because he thinks when he says 10 liters, he will get more. So when it's been organized around also some business structures where now the accuracy of this data is also validated at a cooperative level or at a circle level, but also or at a agripreneur level. But we'll also give some farmers some apps where they can also actually send that data. And we have, if you run models in the era of AI, you are able to detect level of accuracy of that data that's coming. And if there are always indicators that the data may not be accurate, the agripreneur can go and validate and verify that the data that the farmer sent is really accurate. It's kind of a farmer management record system where a farmer should be able to manage his own record. But because some of them are digitally challenged, literacy-wise, some of them may not be honest, we must find a way of validating that data. So agripreneur, running AI models at cooperative or circle level.
Thank you for that. Any other questions?
There's 2 hands there.
Thank you for the organizers and everything. This is my second AgriFin meeting. I represent the rural women. My county is Kirinyaga County, Kirinyaga Central. But I have never seen anyone from any organization coming there to help us or to show us how to test the soils, how to put inputs and everything. It's certainly those people who sell dawa za kupiga dawa, za kupiga mimea. Now my question is, how do as I came from the village, there are many women, when I came from the last meeting, who came to my home to see how cows are reared, because I understood that there was something called DigiFarm, which teaches women how cows are farmed, how you can farm chakula and all this. How are we going to assess, or how are those rural women going to assess the services of data if you don't give them phones, if you don't give them the right things? Not that we like free things, but you can assist us to show that, so that our use can be more on the farms, on the production level, and everything. You are all welcome to come and see us and assist us. Thank you.
Okay, for your case, it's a very good and practical question. In my previous life, before I joined FA, I was the director ICT for CALRO, the Kenya Agricultural Livestock Research Organization, for the last 10 years. And we did a lot of digital interventions. One is that the model of extension, which was public sector driven extension, where an extension officer come to your home to guide you, collapsed many years ago. When I was less than 10 years old, a man used to come to our home with a bicycle to advise my father how to farm. Then he started coming with a motorbike, and then the man disappeared and never seen him again. So now that that model failed, and the ratio of extension officers to farmer now is standing at 1 to 3,000. It's not sustainable. Even those who are remaining are not retooled. They learned in the 1960s. They are not facilitated. They are tired and frustrated. So it's not working. And therefore, that's why the digital is coming in. Now, what are the barriers to access and the use of digital tools in agriculture? Devices, you've talked about, internet connectivity, literacy, and lack of awareness. In Laikipia County, where we piloted how to address these barriers, we started by awareness creation. And we'll create awareness in churches, in barasas, and we're focusing mainly on women because funded by FCDO. And a women group went and managed to sell their seedling to Kenya Defense Forces at 10 million Kenya shillings. And the message went to the village. I don't know what happened. All women in that village bought phones. So what I'm saying is, what we need is to demonstrate impact and not to buy them phones, because nobody will afford that. Even the government can't afford that. So what we need to demonstrate is impact. How can we show impact of digital tools? Number two, when we trained them to build their capacity and they were able to use some of these tools, there's a farmer who was throwing up his apples, but was now getting orders and even importing his orders, his apples. We found farmers who were able to sell their goats to other counties. So what we need is to demonstrate impact and build the capacity of the farmers. I was in Western Kenya TV sometimes back, and I was explaining these things. And a woman came on television and said, I am a beneficiary of these digital tools. If I knew this information 5 years ago, all my children would have gone to school. Because now, my children are going to school. I can check the weather forecast on my phone. I know the right seed to plant, the right time to plant it, and I'm receiving SMS advisories from CALRO, and now my children are going to school. The women in that village went and bought phones and went to that woman, tell us how to use it, because it was in vernacular. So what we need to demonstrate is impact and showcase those who have used these tools and are successful and made a difference. We also found out in Laikipia, language was a problem. And we translated these digital tools to local language, to Kikuyu and Maasai, which are the common languages in Laikipia. And if you go to Laikipia now, we'll find more than 50% of women in that county are using digital tools. So all we need to demonstrate impact. And all we need to identify what are their challenges and address those barriers to use and access of digital information. Because the public face-to-face extension may not, Jesus may come earlier before it comes.
We started off with the question, what is climate smart agriculture to you? So I wrote it down, and I think to me it's knowing how to make use of nature's capabilities to restore and protect farmlands and to help it to reach to its full potential. And I believe that Acorn and what it can provide for does just that. So Acorn, in a nutshell, is basically just a platform connecting smallholder farmers to the voluntary carbon markets. The aim is to remove CO2 from the air by stimulating these smallholder farmers to transition from monoculture practices to agroforestry. I will go over all the details a bit later, so I will skip this slide. But first, maybe a little bit on carbon markets, because you hear the phrase a lot, and there's so many differences, so I thought it might be good to quickly go over the carbon markets. So we start with the international markets, because it's a response to try to lower the emissions. You have the compliance market, and that's usually based on regulations made by EU, for instance, or also governments within countries, saying, okay, this company can only emit this amount of CO2, and you need to reduce over the coming years. So if a company does very well, and it's under the limit that it's allowed, they can even trade these carbon credits to other companies. So that's the compliance markets. Mostly we're here talking about the voluntary carbon markets. And the voluntary carbon market is the market that companies voluntarily buy credits to reduce their emissions because they have targets, because they want to reduce it to zero, for instance, net zero, you hear it a lot. That's basically buying off your unavoidable emissions because you need to heat the building, for instance. So that is mostly likely to be unavoidable unless you switch to solar panels, for instance. So if you take these voluntary carbon markets, you have 3 types of credits. And they are very different, and they're mixed up all the time. So you have avoidance credits. That's basically the RED Plus projects, for instance. That's focused on avoiding carbon being released in the air. So protecting forests from trees being cut down, because then the trees cannot take up CO2 from the atmosphere anymore, or it gets burned, so released back into the atmosphere. That is the avoidance market. And it's very tricky, that market, or tricky is not the right phrase, but you need to make a lot of assumptions. And based on these assumptions, I'm going to protect the forest, and I think we might avoid emitting X amount of CO2. And based on these assumptions, you sell the credits. And then you keep on monitoring afterwards, did that assumption come true? And there has been some publications in the market that it didn't, that they overestimated the avoided reductions. But I think it's still good to protect forests, right? So don't kill the good for the excellent, I would say. On the other 2 types, you have reduction. A nice example of that is the use of technology. So cook stoves, for instance, they burn more efficiently, so they reduce less CO2 than if you use the old-fashioned stoves, for instance. And then you come to the removal. So that's technology or nature-based solutions, as we also call it, that really remove CO2 from the atmosphere. Tree planting is a very good example from that. And it's called nature-based solutions. Also, soil restoration is a nature-based solution to store more carbon in the soil. Finally, you have 2 types of accounting for these credits. One is called ex ante. So that means I'm going to plant 100 trees. I'm going to assume 40% survives. I'm going to assume that they grow at this rate. So that results in this amount of CO2 from the atmosphere. I immediately sell these credits, and then I have cash flow in, and then I can fund my project. That's ex ante. Still, you need to monitor every year if that assumption is true. Then you have ex post. Ex post means that you measure in hindsight. So you plant the trees, and you measure in hindsight the growth. So you're actually selling the carbon stored in the tree. And that is what Acorn is all about. It's a removal, nature-based solution ex post. And we call it carbon removal units compared to credits, because we think that has a better understanding of what it is. And to be the voluntary market, currently only 3% is really removals, so nature-based solutions. So there's lots of potential, I would say. I've taken up a lot of my time already, right, on the carbon market, so sorry. So we, our client base and the clients that we have within Rabobank, most of them have expressed ambitious goals to reduce their emissions. And that kind of like sets the market for the future. So we think in future, the demand side, so the buyers of the credits will not be the problem. It will be the supply. How much carbon credits will we actually have to sell to these companies? So maybe a little bit on why does Rabobank is involved in this. And I think because we were once founded by farmers, we still have a large footprint in the agricultural sector. So when we thought of our contribution to fighting climate change, we thought it would be best to focus on smallholder farmers because we think they are hit most by climate change. And we made this proposition that's purely based on helping farmers become more climate resilient. And I think this is the key message of our carbon proposition. It's not about the carbon. You don't plant trees just because of the carbon. You plant trees because it can improve your farmland. And agroforestry has lots of benefits. It kind of creates a small microclimate on your farm. If you put for instance, trees around your farmland as a barrier, you're protected from extreme winds, for instance. It improves the soil, water retention, lots of good benefits of agroforestry. And in the end, it will improve your yield because, well, if you're suffering from droughts, the trees can really protect your crops. And what we will come up in a slide bit later, what we've proven to see is that the productivity increase is much more higher than the carbon proceeds that can be expected. So when we entered into this proposition, we found out that there are quite a number of barriers for the smallholder farmers to access the voluntary carbon market. So you have huge certification costs because every project needs to be certified. For instance, to develop a project sometimes can take up to 3 to 5 years before it even starts. So that's a true challenge. And another challenge is monitoring costs. You need to monitor the carbon that you're selling for additional 20 years minimum. So you need to have a cost-efficient way of doing so. And mostly it's done now by going back to the fields, sample testing, counting all the trees, so that's a lot of work. Which comes at a high cost. And then at the end, if you sell the carbon removal units, we saw that most of the times a large proportion of the proceeds flow back to the investor or to the implementer or to traders even. And we think the farmers are taking care of the trees, they are maintaining them, they should be the ones rewarded for that. So we've come up with a sort of an umbrella certification. We've developed this together with Plan Vivo, who is the certifying body of our credits. And this means that if projects adhere to the criteria in the framework, then they are automatically certified. We have an own certification team in-house who has developed standard templates, and together with all of our local partners, we fill in these templates and we get the program certified. We pick up the cost for certification. The input from the local partner, the time that they need to spend, that's their investment. On the second bottleneck that we saw, we've developed models so we can monitor the biomass on the plots of the individual farmers by making use of remote sensing techniques. So we're combining satellite data with LiDAR data and with ground truth data as well. So at the start of every project, we do ground truth data to further increase the predictability. And in our framework, it states that 80% of the future carbon proceeds should flow back to the farmer. The other 20% is being divided between Acorn to cover the cost of certification and monitoring, and 10% can be withheld by our local partners, because they need to also do data management, etc. So this is kind of how it works. Farmers start planting trees on their land, and we have a very important role for our local partners. Those are organizations on the ground in the countries that we work in who have large networks of farmers, and they help the farmers implement the correct spacing, for instance, between the tree seedlings. And they also most often provide trainings on regenerative practices as well. They are also the ones who collect the farmer data, and they need to map out the polygon of the land of the farmer. So we as ACOR know where to measure the uptake of biomass. After we know where the farmer is located, once a year we measure the growth in biomass, and we convert the growth of biomass into carbon removal units, our CRUs. We sell these to our buyers. Microsoft has been our launching customer, so they've been with us since the start, and they have a huge demand for carbon removal units, so we're not finished with the collaboration with them yet. Also nice to learn that financial institutions are also buying our credits, and Standard Chartered being very critical on the carbon market. That really says something about the quality of our credits, we believe. So when we receive the proceeds of the sales, we retire the credits immediately. That means that if you purchase the credit, you cannot trade it to somebody else and speculate on price increases, because we think the farmer should benefit most, and not some trader or other parties. So we transfer 90% back to the local partner. They are allowed to retain 10%, and 80% should flow back to the farmer, either in cash or in kind. It can be a combination, but always with the approval of the project council, and those are the representatives of the farmers participating. So you can also use portion of the proceeds to provide them with seedlings or other inputs. And we think that that money can also be used to finance the transition, because there is a funding gap. But the finance, I think we'll touch upon that later in the panel as well. To get a little bit of more clear of what is in it for a farmer, so on average we see roughly about 4 to 6 carbon removal units on a hectare that can be sold every year. And currently we're at a price of 30 euros per crew. So 80% flowing back to the farmer means roughly 100 and a little above. So this also shows you're not going to get rich of planting trees. It's all about the other benefits. So some conclusions. For every project, we draft a business case on farmer level as well. And what we found is indeed that the productivity increases expected are way higher than the carbon proceeds. It really depends on if a farmer is already part of a strong value chain. So for instance, if a farmer is a coffee farmer, then the percentage of the crew is less. But the yield improving is also much bigger. So these are some learnings, and that's exactly why we think it's so important to tell the farmer the right message. You should plant trees because of all the other benefits and not because of the carbon proceeds. So we do not go into the areas telling farmers, if you plant trees, you're going to get money, because we think that's the wrong message. I think I'm over time already, so I'm skipping some things. This is just a summarization of our credits. We've already touched upon this. This is a nice slide, I think. So we started 2 years ago. We're live already. I need to say we're an airplane and we're still building all the pieces, but we decided to go ahead anyways. So currently over 200,000 farmers are being supported. We have issued 255,000 crews. That's roughly about 6.1 million euros, of which 80% is flowing back to all of these farmers, covering over 230,000 hectares. And we have large ambitions, so ideally we would want to scale this up and even double it or triple it at the end of the year. I think I'll stop now. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, Marguerite. Before she leaves the stage, any questions for her? Hands up. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Oh, can you hear me? Hi. Thank you so much. Very quick question. I just wondered when you were talking about convincing farmers to get involved in the tree planting, do you find that using that data to explain to the farmers that it's not so much about the payment for the CRUs, but it's more about the additional benefits? Is that something that you find farmers are getting quickly, or is it a difficult message to carry over to farmers? Just interested.
Yeah, good question indeed. So that's why it's so important to work with local partners who know the local context and the local culture. And we always advise them to inform local leadership, stakeholders, lead farmers, or maybe farmers that have a plot of agroforestry already, to really show the benefits. But I do recognize that it's maybe a new message, and so farmers convincing of doing something else that they've always done is kind of tricky. So that's why you really need to involve, I think, the whole community, leadership, stakeholders, government as well, to try to convince them that this is a good practice. And farm visits to farmers who have already adopted to agroforestry kind of like really showcase it. What we've also learned is that having payment ceremonies really helps. So really showing that this can work. I totally recognize it's a struggle, and you will always have farmers that choose to cut down their trees, for instance, to sell it if they need money ASAP. But hopefully they will see that their production is increasing because of planting trees amongst them. And seeing, I've seen some fields from farmers in the Embu area, and there's a lot of maize production, for instance. And you saw like the fields of farmers who didn't plant trees, the maize was like this high, and I thought, oh, that's already quite nice. And then you look to the other side of the road of an agroforestry plot, and you saw trees in between, and flowers in between, and good practices like beans in between the maize, and it was literally almost double in the height, and much more greener. So, yeah, that's the best convincing, I would say.
Hello. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much for your presentation. I was saying I work with 1 Acre Fund, and obviously we partner together on a lot of these projects. One of the things that I find interesting in this conversation is you deal with international certification, but one of the other major barriers for smallholder farmers is local legislation. And that's, I think, something that kind of ties into the conversation from the previous gentleman that I would love to hear more on, either from you or from him in the panel conversation. Like, how do we overcome that, particularly when a lot of, like, it's obviously a new market, it's a new space, new legislation coming in, but usually the way that it's being set up, it actually completely excludes smallholder farmers. There's a lot of upfront costs that are just not possible for either organizations like yourself or like us as 1 Acre Fund to fund. And where is the space for the government to come in? I don't know if you've had any new insight on that, or if anyone else can speak to that.
Yeah, no, really good question. So that's always the first thing that we dive into. Is there any regulation on carbon markets already existing? And a lot of countries are still in development. So what we try to do is involve the government on a national level, but also on county level as soon as possible, and explain them about the project, how it works, but particularly that the local community and local people are going to benefit most of this. So if you're going to regulate it heavily, or tax it really heavily, it's kind of like taking away money from these farmers, right? So we're trying to really be involved in these conversations and advise on legislation as soon as it's being written. We have a governmental affairs colleague within our team who's really focused on that, who does tries to make governments more aware of the impact of their regulation. and trying, sometimes what we also see is that governments are willing to exempt or exclude our projects with large benefits flowing back to the community from the usual regulation, so that we get like an approval that we do not have to pay our taxes, etc. But like very transparent registries would help very much, and also more inclusion of agroforestry on privately owned land by smallholder farmers would really benefit. So we're trying to get that message across, and I think a lot of partners in our network do the same. So we really need to keep on pushing on that, but it can be a problem, yeah.
I think the question we're kicking off with, which is up for everyone to see now, is in what ways do digital solutions unlock climate-smart agriculture? And so for the panelists, as we'll go along, maybe we'll start with Hedwig, about which different agricultural productions are you working in, and where do digital solutions come into play, as well as introducing yourself.
Okay, thanks. So my name is Hedwig Siewertse, and I work in Agra since 2015 as the head of inclusive finance. So that's trying to get finance to SMEs and farmers. Agra works in food crops, so that's cereals, roots and tubers, pulses, oilseeds. So not in the more organized cash crops. I think that's a very important issue. So let's say we do the hard to do things, or we try to do that. Digital. I think digital for me is an enabler to transit information or to transit cash. So either of the two is possible with digital to make it much more efficient, cheaper, etc. And then the last bit is, of course, collection of data. So in 2015, I came to Agra to manage a digital solutions for smallholder farmers program called VisFab, funded by MasterCard Foundation. And we had the great opportunity to invest, start, seed, venture type of grants into digital solutions. So we've learned a lot of things because it was newish. M-Pesa was there, of course, but that was really the time that MasterCard invested a lot of money in rural digital. So the AgriFin Accelerate was part of that as well, and the Fund for Rural Prosperity. And yeah, so it's good that we are here to share still what we have learned, because sometimes you see things being done over and over again, making the same mistakes. So I think one of the issues that I have not heard here is really the need for tech and touch. So digital alone cannot do it. Really, farmers need to see people. They need to hear from people. They believe people, mainly their peers, mainly their chamas, mainly their local rural financial institutions. So they were much more successful in taking up digital than the big banks, for example. Right? Big banks like NMB and KCB, less successful in getting adoption, because that's the word I've also not heard. How do we get farmers to adopt technology and I mean, in Agra, if we talk about adoption of technology, we talk about seeds and we talk about soil health practices. I mean, 80% of farmers are not using improved seeds. So all these FAOs, all the CG centers, all the research, the Calros, they have a lot of technology. It's not the lack of technology, it's there. How do farmers adopt it? Do they see a business case? I think often not. I mean, why would you produce more maize if you don't have a market, if it starts rotting in your shed because you can't store it? So there's so much more always to investigate and look at. So I think adoption is very important. So yeah, the tech and touch, to go back about the lessons learned, is important. I think we were much more successful with rural financial institutions, so a focus on that and help them digitize, so that they indeed become more efficient and more customer-oriented was a big one. The big banks, not really, because their services are very expensive. And then I think understanding the business case for each of the actors. So for example, in Acorn, my question is, what is the business case for Solidaridad? I think they have a genuine interest to promote agroforestry, like Agra. We also like agroforestry, and that is why we should invest, because I think the business case, you cannot cover the cost, right, of collecting all this data from farmers. I mean, it's quite a lot of data, right, and the integrity of carbon credits is a big question mark. And then the price is $2, you pay 30, which is fantastic, but I mean, the market price is $1.5, I think. So, yeah. I think we need to pick our battles and understand. So the battles for Agra is really adoption of improved seed and densification of extension workers. How can we do that, right? Agent networks, village-based advisors, linking to public sector extension workers. So I think that's the key priority areas for. So yeah, I'm not even touching on finance. Maybe that comes later, right? Okay, thanks.
Thanks. No, I think what I'm hearing, so Agra is working on which food systems is which agricultural production system, it's food systems, edible crops, which digital solutions, digital financial services, digital information services. We've heard already a bit from different agricultural production systems you're working in, but if you could highlight where digital plays a role.
Good digital tools that make the whole process of onboarding these farmers onto our platform efficiently. So you can imagine when we first started out with Acorn, we used maybe phones that were not so accurate in terms of GPS. We learned that not all existing tools were usable. So we decided to again come up with a new tool, the data collection tool for Acorn, so that we could list all of the data one time right, because that saves really going back into the field, because transportation costs were enormous. But we also found that we have a closed app and it doesn't talk to the systems that our local partners are working with. So they need to maybe collect more data points for their donors, for instance. So they're now using 2 apps. So that's I think integration of all data tools used would be a good thing. So that's more on the process, and what we've also seen is that our local partners are the ones that are helping the farmers on adopting to better practices. And they sometimes have their own tools of their own learning. Sometimes they use digital tools from other aggregators as well. And then the part on what is carbon, and that is kind of missing. So you're kind of like picking all of the good tools that are available in the market. And then also, not every farmer has a phone, or not every farmer can read very well. So, and not English maybe, so translation into other languages is very important, I think, so that the tools should be available in multiple languages. And also like more infographics style to make it understandable. Yeah, so that's the importance for us from digital tools. So really to spread the message about the benefits of agroforestry, I would say. Yeah. And payment solution, that's also, yeah. But I think in terms of digital payments, I think Africa is way ahead of other countries as well. Yeah, so that's good.
Yeah. So working in agroforestry systems and then highlighting some digital solutions there around farmer onboarding, data collection, and then also highlighting the importance of interpersonal communication support to users of the app and user-centered design to get the right information and in-person in parallel.
Yeah. And maybe just to add on that, so it's not just advisory services, but also like training modules, right? So why do we advise this and this?
So moving to Jeremy, same questions. Which production systems are you working in? We heard a little bit from your colleague, but how would you characterize those different production systems? And then how is digital helping you in this space?
Yeah, so I mean, being a soil health services company, we work in many different value chains. Normal value chains are those value chains that are generally consuming fertilizers. so higher value chains. For us, climate smart agriculture is all about soil health. So it follows that farmers need to know their soil before they can adopt soil health management interventions. One of the big pushes is obviously increasing carbon. As we increase carbon, we increase the amount of moisture that's stored in the soils. So water, it's no coincidence that solar irrigation systems are getting a lot of climate finance, and that's because we're getting more water into the soils. But there's a very small percentage of farmers who are ever going to be able to install irrigation systems. So let's build the carbon up in the soil to hold double, 3 times more water in the soils. So for us, in terms of digital, cost and access to soil testing services by farmers has always been a challenge. So we've applied a fingerprinting system for soils across Africa using machine learning and neural networks, which greatly reduces the cost of providing soil data information to farmers. We've built a platform which enables our partners to sign up onto the platform and start embedding soil testing and soil health advisory services to their farmers. So we're very much working with extension-facing organizations who don't have access to soil testing, soil health advisory services in their platform. Communication for us is a key. So how do you get the communication about what to do with your soil, all the way from liming to crop diversification to regenerative farming practices to planting which fruit trees are suitable in that region or in that soil. So there's a wide range of advisory that we give on the back of this soil information, not just a fertilizer program.
Great, no, thanks. So some interesting digital solutions there on making it more efficient to deliver the services to your clients.
More efficient and lower cost.
And lower cost, and those gains that come with technology. But again, highlighting the importance of in-person interaction alongside those digital tools.
Yeah, and we work with learning on the communication platform. So we're taking our knowledge as soil health specialists for the past 25 years across the continent, and giving this training platform through to our partners, agents and agronomists, so that they can also take this soil health information advisory to their farmers. So it's very much from our side as a business-to-business model.
Yeah. Great, thank you very much. Dr. Guyo, if you could introduce yourself and same questions, which agricultural production systems are you working in, and where do you see digital solutions?
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Guyo Roba. I work with the International Livestock Research Institute. I'm heading an observatory called Jamil Observatory for Food Security Early Action. Largely, I work in all my life in dryland areas, working with the pastoralists and in some cases with agro-pastoralists. So I think for us, I think the fortunate or unfortunate, I think the climate smart thing has taken very strong roots in crop systems as opposed to the livestock systems. But I think livestock systems is also catching up. So I think for me the definition crosses that it's a production, climate smart agriculture in livestock looks at the twin interlinked issues around food security and the climate issues. So and to bring it closer in livestock system is largely about our land-based systems and how do we manage livestock from grazing management, from the herd splitting that people do traditionally, from that breeding issue to disease management and etc. So I think in the space for digital solution in the pastoral area, I talk about the promise of digital solution rather than solution itself. The promise is in many areas. One, I think in the space which I work in drought management space, the what you call the drought early warning systems, which is an important thing in terms of preparing people to manage the shocks, is still has a missing link between those who organizes the early warning and those who use the early warning and receive the early warning in the form that is understood. So, and partly because these things are not co-produced, the people at the end of this solution have no contribution to the product that they get. So there's huge promise there. I think there's the other promise, because in my former life at IFAD, I worked in the livestock investment side. It is a huge promise in commercialization, in the marketization, in organizing farmers and producers into a hub so that they access usually non-traditional market where there is no potential for bilateral in a relationship-based market that we are commonly using in the pastoral areas. So the digital solution is how much it can bridge to create people who are normally not speaking to speak to each other and strike a bilateral relationship, and also potential for that particular group of people to do business together. So, and of course, I think in the rangeland also side, there is a huge potential for application, because I think when the presenter was giving, I think two people talk about the carbon sequestration, and largely I think there's a lot of experiment in the rangeland areas, potential for the rangeland to do carbon sequestration, and for the farmers to be organized and managed along certain side for them to access the market, to access the benefit. And this conversation is coming up in the face of the drought, for potential for diversifying income and etc. So I think there are many spaces within that, but then I speak of the promise because I don't think we have really striked that in the pastoral areas, largely because of the biases, and secondly because I don't think we have really fashioned a product in that system where people are dispersed, mobile, and have other issues which are not very common within the settled systems. Thank you.
Thank you. So working in the livestock systems, pastoralist context in particular, seeing a huge potential for digital services, but much earlier stage than the conversations we're having in food crops or in high potential crops in terms of what solutions could make sense. Dr. Wario, would you like to introduce yourself and also the same two questions, which production systems and where do you see digital?
Thank you very much, Chloe. So my name is Wario Sake. I work for Northern Rangeland Trust Trading. And Northern Rangeland Trust Trading is a branch of Northern Rangeland Trust that works with communities of Northern Kenya for resilience building and also for resilient future through enterprise. So we do a number of programs at Northern Rangeland Trust, and I'm the head of livestock in those programs. And these programs now, the convergence with digital climate smart is where we work also for resilience building and also for mindset change. Yeah.
Great. And where do you see in the communities where you work, where do you see engagement with digital solutions?
So I think digital solution is a form of value addition to what is being done. So out in the rangelands or in this landscape where we work with people, pastoralists who largely have not gone to school. There is a lot of high literacy level, and there is a lot of sensitization that needs to be done actually to orient them on the existence of best practices in terms of technology and many things. So through our trainings, our capacity trainings, already people are really willing. There is a lot of willingness for people to come on board to learn new things. So many of us could be thinking that pastoralists out there could just be passive, and they could just be taking receiving the brands of climate change and all this. But what we see, the reality is that they are active learners. They are people who are on course. They can learn new things, and that gives a lot of hope, even to accept and embrace digital climate. Yes.
What innovative financing mechanisms, instruments have you seen that work? What would you suggest as a way forward in finance?
Difficulty with the digital connection, let's say, right? Financing agriculture SMEs is already difficult enough. It's all about reducing cost and risk of financing agri SMEs. So that's the biggest thing. So we work from different angles. So first is the cost of capital. So that's where blended finance comes in, right? How can we reduce the cost of capital? So by mixing public and private money, you get lower cost capital. Like for example, in Tanzania, they have reduced the cost of the interest rate going out of the banks by investing public money. Other examples here in Kenya, the National Guarantee Fund is a way to, well, mix public or use public money to get private money out of the door, because they have a guarantee of in case people are not repaying. So that's one, right? That's the cost of capital. Then in the middle bit, I think what we are doing is working with financial institutions to develop solutions, products, financial products that have alternative risk-reducing features. One example is where inputs for farmers are being financed not only by the bank, but also risk is being shared by input dealers because they sell more inputs, and by the off-takers because they want to get the produce from the farmer. So then at least you have 4 people involved, the financier, the farmer, the off-taker and the input dealer, who all share the risk. And sharing risk really means putting money on the table. So the input dealer is only paid 90% or 80% of the cost of the inputs. So that's the part of the risk. Then the off-taker puts capital in the bank as a guarantee. And the financier and the farmers take the rest of the risk. And then you can, on top, put a guarantee fund. So that's another mechanism that we have been testing, trying, documenting, and I hope we get it to scale now for more financial institutions. But it depends on markets, right? So farmers need to be connected to markets. And of course the issue of side selling. But I think that this is a good solution. Now, and of course, if that works, then of course you could digitize those relationships, right? But it's first to get these 4 people together and to agree on what to do, then of course digital. And what I often see is that digital is first, as if that's the solution. No, the solution is that these 4 people need to talk to each other and agree on a deal, on a price, on a volume, on conditions. So that is what we are working on a lot. So blended finance, cost of capital, then financial institutions having this type of alternative risk sharing models, and then from banks to farmers to SMEs to farmers. I think that's where digital can really reduce the cost of talking to each other and transferring funds. So I think that's digitization of SACOS. I think that was one of the best investments we did. That's really, I mean, it's a good business case, right, for SACOS. It pays off to invest in digitizing their systems. And because that gives them much more clients, gives them higher turnover of their loan portfolios. So I think that is a real no-brainer in terms of investment for digitization.
Perfect. No, thank you for lots of rich examples there. Moving on to Margriet, on a project level, within what you're doing at Acorn, how do you see financing approaches have been successful?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think sometimes you hear the wording carbon finance, and I think it's kind of confusing, because carbon finance is all about when are the cash flows flowing in. Because if you know when they're flowing in, then you can structure financial solutions on top of that. For instance, Acorn is exposed. That means that you first have to invest, and then in a couple of years, the first carbon money will start flowing in. So how do we finance our projects? We find that our local partners, some of them are very capable of attracting funds themselves. For instance, Solidaridad, they're mostly donor-based, working with grants. So we're also kind of like testing with them to try to get these grants in revolving facilities. So if you have a grant, not just give away the seedlings for free to the farmers, but have also them pay back from the future carbon proceeds, for instance, so that you can leverage this money and onboard an additional group of farmers, for instance. So it's also like advising and talking to local partners, how can we make best uses of the funds available? So that's one flavor. And also I think it's not that there's one solutions for every project. So if local partners are not capable of attracting funding, when I first joined Aecon, I thought, wow, that's easy, right? There's lots of climate finance money in the market. It's just linking these financiers to our local partners. But it takes so long. And it's kind of like the tenors were way off because farmers needed to pay back in like 2 years. Well, the tree is like this big, right? You cannot pay back from these proceeds only. And then the interest that were asked, even by impact investors, they're really huge. So that if you need a long tenor as a farmer to repay the investment cost, and you have a high interest, then it immediately becomes not feasible anymore. And that's why we also are now within Rabobank are trying to set up an own capital pool to finance these projects. But we need other parties also to come along and indeed blend the structure. That means that you are getting donors involved who are willing to take up the first risk and who do not need return, for instance. And if you get a lot of parties around the table, then you can blend the interest rates and make it a little bit more cheaper for the farmer. So it's still a bottleneck, I would say, but I think we're heading into the right direction and being in conversations with the right partners who are willing to be a little bit more bold and acknowledge that we need to start investing in these projects, because if we wait longer, it only becomes more expensive.
So what I'm hearing and what both of you have shared is that we need to get the business models right around production, and that requires collaboration and investment before thinking about how solutions in digital solutions could then gain more efficiencies in the process and support that. But really, how do we bring all the financing to the table to get the business model right from the start for everyone involved? Jeremy, in your experience, how has it been leveraging finance for crop nuts?
Tough. I think I'll talk more about financing of the solutions that we have and getting these solutions to farmers and what's worked and what we're looking to focus on in the future. So what's really worked for us in terms of scaling up soil test, soil health advisory services is with input supply companies, where these input supply companies are embedding the cost of our service into their offer to farmers. So one of these very successful partnerships would be like through FTMA, with Yara, through OCP School Lab, where they have their mobile trucks in many different countries across Africa, providing site-specific soil test and soil information to their farmers. So our technology is behind those types of partnerships. So the farmer's not paying directly for the service, but it's a cross-sell from the input supply industry. And that means that the farmer is always getting the right inputs, and the right combination of inputs helps to increase their yield, and that biomass goes back into the soil and builds the soil health. The other areas that we're looking at, which are harder at the moment to get some traction, is financing from banks who are handing out, or not handing out, but giving loans to farmers for fertilizers. So we've seen a massive risk where farmers don't have the information on what are the right inputs to buy with that loan, and therefore more often than not are actually going to the agro dealer and buying the inappropriate input. So we see that type of linking of the loan to soil information at site-specific farmer level means that that farmer has a prescription tied to that loan, and then they draw down on that loan with the right inputs from their local agro dealers. The other areas we're looking at, which is again is sort of a longer play, is the linking of soil test, soil information systems into national subsidy programs, particularly in the field of lime subsidy programs, where we can again help governments to link subsidy finance for inputs through to soil information. That's a longer play, I would say. And then carbon. Carbon is in the future would be able to sort measurement of soil carbon, could subsidize to some degree or finance to some degree the scaling up of soil testing services. So one is working very well, and we've reached 350,000 farmers in the last 4 years with that first customer type, and the others we're working around getting those to run. Yeah, thank you.
Actually, there are 3 different areas which definitely is important for focus, because I'm trying to give this question a framing of policy angle that you need to look at and also the operational angle that you need to look at. There are 3 areas from my practice that one has to place this. The first, I think, is how countries generally or regions have built an enabling environment for adaptation, investments. And this enabling policy, enabling environment speak to different things. The first, I think, is the policy aspect, where I think different countries are at different level in terms of the development of national adaptation plans, its implementation, oversight, and etc. And also the capacity to analyze, climate data to position the risk that populations are facing in terms of characterization of the risks. But then there's also the market environment, where I think the question of how much have we deepened our insurance question, whether it's parametric insurance, index-based insurance, and our borrowing capacity, and etc. That is another level in terms of enabling environment. The third, I think, is the institutional and stakeholder environment. And this speaks to the availability of accredited agencies to access this climate financing, the macro level climate financing questions. The question around grants, question around technical assistance, different questions around, I think, liquidity aspect, which I think those who have worked in dryland areas know. So this is another level. But then there's the third level. The fourth level is this, the capacity of countries in terms of the science-based policy and projects development is one area that I think within the enabling environment one has to develop. But then the second level is it's how much aggressively have we taken advantage of innovative financial instruments. There are many in different countries. There are many, the grant-based, the technical assistance, what we call the risk-responsive liquidity instruments such as cash transfer programs and etc. So this is the level, this is the other level where I think if countries have better arrangement in terms of financial deepening, we can take advantage. But then the third level is how much have we ingrained or integrated climate adaptation investments within the decision processes, which basically speaks to a multinational which is either investing in agricultural value chain or water infrastructure. How much have we placed that within that? And that again speaks to the data question, how much climate information is available, what is the capacity of these institutions to evaluate and and action risks in this space, what does the national space talk about the disclosure of the risk and how investors can take advantage of this. So when you look at the 3 levels, they are all areas that could be interesting. But then lastly, in the space that I work, I think there are non-traditional donors in the climate space that are emerging slowly, which is the foundation-based, institutions that have better money, flexible arrangement. They give you gift to do research and use that research to inform your decision, inform your policy. So the landscape from the macro level around bigger climate financing, around Green Climate Fund, GF, and etc., which are periodic investments depending on the cycles. We also have these emerging actors who are coming to this space that offer better opportunity, especially in the space of smallholder farmers and livestock keepers.
It's important, the innovative ideas that people have to be delivered. So for that, finance is very crucial. But we also, I told you about the trainings that are aimed at changing the mindset of people. Sometimes we need to look internally, what do we have, what resources we have. And I think the donor world has done a lot generally in financing, and driving change. But we also have governments, and when our human resource is adequately sensitized, sometimes we could even be involved to create our own resources through our participation in planning. So government resources are available, and I think we really need to embrace public-private partnership in financing digital climate agriculture.
What are some of the key policies and enabling environment pieces that need to be in place?
I think a lot of knowledge building and capacity building amongst our local partners, but also on the participating farmers is needed. Monitoring, bringing partners together, learning from each other, involving the local communities in the design, for instance, on agroforestry. So asking the farmers, what type of trees would you like to plant on your trees? Is it fruit trees? And I've also found that a lot of knowledge with the older farmers is still there. So they really have a good knowledge of what type of tree is good for mulching, for feeding to the animals. So there is a lot of knowledge in the communities, and I would say tap into this. And also, I think making farming a bit more sexy again, like like was mentioned before, so that it's really more turned into a business case. And I really like the project that Agra is supporting on getting more entrepreneurial vibes into farming again. So not just farming for my own food production, but also how can I sell and make the most out of it. Access to market is obviously very important to that. So yeah, lots of angles to create this good enabling environment, I would say. Yeah.
We have a lot of tools within sort of the farming space that helps to build climate resilient farming, you know, all the way from tillage equipment through to weed management control, and so on and so forth. And the government really needs to look at, you know, removing the tax off some of these tools that help farmers to actually move to these climate smart farming practices. So I think for me it's more a question of how do we work with the government to support smarter subsidy programs. We shouldn't really be rolling out programs that stifle innovation in the soil health space, which is, you know, often the case, where farmers will always run to one or two products that have been subsidized, and that actually takes them 3 steps back on their farm. So yeah, for me it's really just around much smarter, well thought out policies that support the entire cropping system and all the interventions required to build climate resilient farms.
Yeah, so a strong call there for subsidies that enable innovation and continued evolution of climate smart farming going forward. Yeah. And Hedwig will wrap up with your reflections here on what policy and governance changes do you think are required by different types of finance actors?
The best contribution for climate change and climate smart and green and is that we are not using more land for agriculture, right? Because that's the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture is land use change, right? Cutting a forest to plant maize in an area which is maybe not suitable. So I think focus on crop intensification and food loss reduction so that we get more food and more nutrition from the same acre of land. I think it's still standing very strong as a climate narrative. I don't hear it very often, right? We talk about solar drip irrigation and things like that, but crop intensification and more nutrition from 1 acre of maize or beans or so that also means wholemeal flour as opposed to maize meal, which is ultra processed and which doesn't have any nutrition value. So I think that's, and in terms of financing, I would ask government to also go for more simple instruments. I mean, I love your work, right? And I love your approach, but it's complicated. So I mean, the government of Costa Rica, for example, they have already for a long time fossil fuel taxes, so carbon taxes, which are directly transferred for ecosystem services, direct cash transfers for people to conserve the forest they live in. So I think that direct mechanisms is really something I would like to see much more. I mean, it requires political buy-in, right? Because governments, if they tax, it goes in the big kitty of the treasury, and then it's decided how we spend money. But for the public to understand the relationship between carbon tax, use of fossil fuel, and ecosystem services, I think it's very key to get buy-in from the public for taxes. Similarly, for sugar tax to be used for school meals. I mean, I love that one, right? Everybody drinking Coca-Cola is contributing to healthier school meals. And that is, I mean, I'm looking more at the food systems, right? Not just carbon and climate, because we're talking about how do we grow, produce, and get more food from the same planet that we live on. So, but I know that, I mean, so in terms of blended finance, right, it's awareness for governments to understand, but it's a lot of political economy. Governments, ministers, etc., they want to be seen handing out money, right, fertilizer subsidies. So blending it with private sector money requires a lot of awareness creation. Why is that good? Evidence, right? What is the impact you get if you blend fund as opposed to handing out subsidies? I think that is a very key, important thing, so that governments, ministers, parliament understand that they can show even better results if they blend money than just handing it out and taking a picture. So, but that requires a lot of, let's say, hard work with governments, parliamentarians, awareness creation, evidence generation, advocacy. So yeah, I think for blended finance to grow big, that's what we need to do and invest in. So it's a bit of a longer shot, but so that's why we need to combine it with these short, simple things: carbon tax, ecosystem services.
Many organizations are able to fund different maybe financial providers that extend loan, or we say these are climate. We have climate finance that we are giving to the farmers, but at the end of the day, we do not consider the financial burden that goes to these smallholder farmers, because you will find that this person who is getting access to this finance in the context of our smallholder farmers, most of them are unbankable, so they will be getting very huge interest rates. So is there anyone working towards ensuring inclusive finance for these smallholder farmers, so that at the end of the day, we are giving you a solution which is not going to be a burden to you, but it's actually going to improve your life? Is there something we are working towards? Maybe a policy to make sure that if we are giving climate finance to a financial institution, it goes at an interest rate that is monitored and affordable to the farmers at the end of the day, so as to meet its purpose. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm finding this conversation really interesting because I'm a fundraiser for smallholder farmers with 1 Acre Fund, and one of the things in the conversation that really struck me is the idea there's all these organizations that need to buy carbon credits, especially tech organizations and big, industries that are looking for carbon credits. But as far as I know, there's not many of them putting money into the initial, carbon credit creation, which takes a lot of infrastructure. So I don't know if any of you have anything or any insight on that, but are they starting to look at that? Because if there is this big pool of people who have funds that they want to put into this, industry that has to be built up, there also has to be a space for them to maybe contribute to that, if they can.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We have tried that to leverage the need for credits to also finance the upfront investment. What we found out is that the company investing then in the program really would like a claim on all of the future carbon credits for 20, 30 years at a fixed low rate. And basically, the difficulty to match that with our framework that states that 80% should flow to the farmer, kind of like it's two worlds colliding, right? We've tried to come up with a solution to say, okay, you have a first right of refusal to these credits generated by this project, but at the market rate at that point in time. And those are very hard discussions, because if you are talking about long-term offtake contracts, then with accounting policies, it becomes a derivative with all additional regulation on top of that. So it sounds like a good idea, but it is kind of hard to structure it. And we also want to safeguard the position of the smallholder farmer and prevent that most of the carbon credits being generated within the project are going to the investor. Because if you do the calculation, it's a lot of money. So yes, we've tried to test that, and we've not been successful so far. Yeah, and also when structuring a financial solution, so maybe a little bit on to keep it the burden on the farmer as low as possible. What we've tried to do with this new financing facility that we're setting up is to not make it out-of-pocket money for the farmer. So the investment costs are being calculated and then being repaid with future carbon proceeds. That means that if the carbon proceeds do not flow in, the loan will not be paid back, basically. So it's an investor risk.
About low interest, I mean, a lot of food crops are low margins and cannot be financed by commercial credit. I think that's for a fact. That's why most farmers, if they use credit for their buying inputs, it's mostly from the local chamas, from table banking, from SACOs, is not from commercial institutions, because that's not viable. So if people do that, it's because they have no other option. And having no other option means that you have not been able to manage your cash, right? At harvest time, you have not put money aside or bought chickens or whatever that allows you to have the money when you need it, when you need to buy inputs. So it's really a cash flow problem. So that's where I think warehouse receipting comes in very important. And that's what Kenya is now going to promote and set up, and we are investing in that. Legislation is now there. So if we can really make warehouse receipting an option for smallholder farmers, I mean now, it's mainly for traders because the warehouses are huge. And there is commingling, so there's still things to do. But I think warehouse receipting in principle allows farmers to get the money when they need it, because they have this warehouse receipt for their produce. So they can have money available when they need it most, when they need to buy inputs. So I think that's an important change. And yes, indeed, markets repay credit. So yeah, that's why the linkages that I was saying earlier between off-takers, input dealers, banks and farmers is so important, because that's the guarantee that a loan can be repaid. I mean, it's the market that will need to repay the credit. So I didn't get the question on the consumers, so I don't know.
So yeah, I think you touched on it. Is that viability and looking at the markets, consumers as the markets.
Yeah, so if it's consumer demand for more sustainable produce, is that the issue? Yeah, I think that's why I like the school meal programs. I mean, it's also to change eating habits. I think many people in Kenya should not be eating maize. They should be eating millets and cowpeas and green grams and the food that was more traditionally in Kenya, leafy vegetables, etc. So if we can indeed influence children through school meals to eat what is best eaten, because that's part of the solution for climate adaptation, is to change your diets. I mean, a lot of pieces in Kenya are not suitable for maize, I think, Jeremy, and are more suitable for other crops. But yeah, people need to eat them. And I think it starts by educating children of what a healthy meal looks like. And yeah. And the sugar tax might also help, and the fat tax. But I think the lobby of the fast food chains is bigger than our voices of nutritious school meals, right? So let's see.
Yes, I think the issue of finance is a bit complex in this view of, let's say, pastoralists up there. But she raised a very important question of, consideration for financial inclusion. It's really very important. The complexity comes with, who are the service providers, what kind of facilities are available for the consumers, And every other time this thing comes up, there is the issue of, let's say, the consumers actually really understanding the facility. Are they really being adequately reached, by these service providers? That's one question. Another question is the design of the facilities. How are they, there is this feeling of most of the financial inclusion facilities being deterrent, in the sense that some of them are designed, not to be Sharia compliant, especially for Muslim section of the communities, all this. And, this one now leaves out majority of the people who are pastoralists, and, it's a challenge. But at Northern Rangeland Trust Trading, we have considered, a comfortable facility for them through a SACCO. So if we do SACCOs, for example, community-owned SACCOs, that they put up their own bylaws and they put their resources together, and they can, get internal loans, and some people get capacities, through that. So that's what we are doing at Northern Rangeland Trust. Yeah.
Great. No, thank you very much for that practical example. I think we'll thank all of the panelists for all the insights today. Thank you very much for the rich discussion and very practical examples. I'm sure they will be available on the way to lunch if you have any further questions or engagement. But thank you all for the time and the engagement.